I remember the day I walked into that shelter, as if it were carved into the very marrow of my days. The unyielding rhythm of rain drumming on the corrugated metal roof above, weaving through the subtle undercurrent of damp fur and weathered concrete that permeated the air like an old, unspoken memory. It had been 6 grueling months since the accident that tore Sarah and little Timmy from my life in one merciless instant, leaving behind a landscape of gray haze and unspoken questions that shadowed every step. I wasn't there with any intention of bringing a dog home. It was merely a diversion, a quiet urge to immerse myself among the animals and perhaps stir a fleeting sense of connection amid the isolation that had become my constant. Yet, as I navigated the narrow aisles lined with kennels, my gaze inevitably settled on him. A magnificent blue-eyed husky withdrawn into the dimmest recess of his enclosure, his form still and detached, as though the essence of vitality had long since ebbed away into some irretrievable distance. In that suspended moment, an undeniable current stirred within me, whispering that leaving him behind was no longer conceivable. Hey, if you're reading this and it resonates with you somehow, maybe drop a 1 in the comments. If not, a 0 works too. It just helps me know if sharing this helped anyone along the way. It was one of those introspective late autumn afternoons, the sort where overcast skies seem to descend like a weighted veil, perfectly attuning to the persistent throb of sorrow that had embedded itself in my core since that fateful night. The highway, notorious for its serpentine turns and sudden drops, had turned deadly under a veil of pounding rain from an unexpected squall when a massive semi-truck skidded across lanes and collided head-on with our sedan. I regained consciousness in the sterile hum of the hospital intensive care unit days afterward, swathed in casts and IV lines, my body a map of bruises and fractures, only to face the devastating truth from the doctors' somber faces. I alone had endured, a solitary thread pulled from the unraveling fabric of our family. The home we had built together, once alive with Sarah's melodic humming in the kitchen and Timmy's exuberant footsteps racing through the halls, now loomed vast and hollow, each piece of furniture and faded photograph a poignant echo of their absence. Well-meaning colleagues from my days as a civil engineer and extended family members offered gestures of support, invitations to dinners, recommendations for grief counseling groups modeled after real-life support networks I'd read about in articles. But the numbness persisted, an impenetrable barrier against the world outside. On that particular rainy afternoon, with droplets tracing erratic paths down the windshield like unshed tears, I found myself steering toward the county animal shelter without a clear plan, the monotonous swish of the wipers syncing with the uneven cadence of my pulse, as if the drive itself were a tentative bridge out of solitude. The facility sat on the outskirts of town, a modest brick building surrounded by chain-link fencing, its parking lot puddled and reflective under the diffuse light. Stepping inside, I was met by Maria, the front desk volunteer, a compassionate woman in her mid-50s with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes crinkled from years of offering quiet encouragement to the lost and the seeking. She slid a clipboard across the counter with adoption guidelines and a reassuring nod. "Take your time," she said, her voice carrying the calm assurance of someone who had watched 100 stories begin in this very place. "No rush. Just see what you feel." I nodded softly and stepped into the heart of the kennels. The air changed there, thick with sound and motion. Terriers yapped for attention, sharp and insistent. Bigger dogs let out low, rolling barks that echoed like distant thunder. And somewhere in between, the soft whimpers of those still learning the shape of their new confinement lingered like a quiet ache in the air. The dogs lined the walkway in a parade of hopeful forms, each pressing forward against the mesh barriers with varying degrees of enthusiasm, their tails sweeping in arcs of anticipation, eyes locked on mine as if willing a spark of recognition. Fluffy golden retrievers bounded with joyful clumsiness, their ears flopping like sails in a breeze. Scrappy terriers twirled in tight circles, emitting high-pitched invitations to play, and a duo of sleek chocolate labs extended their noses through the gaps, damp and insistent, embodying the eager loyalty that had inspired countless real-life adoption tales I'd encountered in online stories from shelters across the country. I progressed methodically down the corridor, allowing their collective vitality to graze the edges of my detachment, igniting brief glimmers of empathy that hinted at a world beyond my grief, much like how studies on human-animal interactions often highlight the therapeutic lift from such encounters. The energy was both invigorating and exhausting, a reminder of life's insistent pulse amid my own stagnation. But as the path curved toward the quieter periphery, where fluorescent bulbs cast softer shadows and the clamor subdued to a murmur, my attention was captured by him, isolated in the last cage on the left. He wasn't clamoring for interaction like his neighbors, nor extending any overture of need. Instead, he occupied the remotest corner, seated with an air of profound stillness, his luxurious coat of intermixed gray and white fibers bearing traces of neglect, tangles from unkempt grooming, and a subtle dullness that spoke of prolonged hardship. Those extraordinary eyes, a striking sapphire blue reminiscent of glacial ice, remained trained on the gritty floor, unyielding and vacant, betraying no flicker of interest in the passerby. He offered no acknowledgment as I halted before his enclosure, no subtle ear twitch or head turn. It was as if he had erected an impenetrable fortress around his spirit, withdrawing to a sanctuary where human approaches held no sway, a defense mechanism honed perhaps from past betrayals, akin to the behaviors observed in rescue animals documented in veterinary case studies on trauma recovery. Easing down into a squat to align my level with his, I observed the measured rhythm of his breathing, the faint quiver of his whiskers and the draft from the ventilation system. "Easy now, friend," I whispered, the words scraping past a throat unused to softness in recent months. He held his position, an embodiment of stoic endurance. Maria joined me shortly, her presence announced by the faint squeak of her sensible shoes on the floor. "We call him Kodiak," she shared in a hushed voice, flipping open a worn folder with his intake notes. "He's endured 3 months here, bless his heart." Rescuers located him after a brutal storm that ravaged the area, foraging near the highway bridge, emaciated with visible ribs and a pronounced limp from what seemed like an untreated injury, possibly a sprain from rough terrain. The team has exhausted every avenue to draw him out. Structured play sessions in the outdoor enclosure with tennis balls and flirt poles, premium treats like dehydrated sweet potato chews and freeze-dried meat to tempt his appetite, and even supervised introductions to our more sociable residents, like a gentle lab mix who usually wins over the shy ones. Yet he consistently retreats inward. Our veterinarian attributes it to profound emotional scarring, likely stemming from maltreatment in a prior household or a sudden callous abandonment that shattered his sense of security. Importantly, he's shown no signs of hostility, just this deep-seated wariness that keeps everyone at arm's length. Following instinct, I slipped my hand through the narrow opening in the gate, holding it flat and motionless, drawing from practical advice in shelter adoption manuals that emphasize non-threatening gestures to build initial rapport. He accorded it a fleeting appraisal, a shadow of caution passing through those luminous eyes, before averting his focus and contracting his frame further, diminishing his silhouette as if to vanish entirely. The gesture struck a resonant chord within me, evoking the way I'd recoiled from social overtures since the memorial service, folding into myself to shield the raw edges of loss, much like the introspective isolation described in personal accounts from grief support forums where survivors share their paths to reconnection. What ultimately swayed me remains a blend of intuition and quiet desperation. Maybe the ethereal quality of his stare when a sliver of overhead light refracted through it, unveiling layers of melancholy that echoed the unspoken voids in my own heart. Or perhaps it was the pragmatic hope that a companion, even a silent one, could disrupt the suffocating quiet that had overtaken the house, transforming it from a mausoleum to something habitable again. Regardless, I rose and faced Maria with resolve. "He's coming with me," I stated, the declaration landing with unexpected firmness. Her face brightened with a blend of joy and tempered realism, and she navigated me through the adoption process with practiced efficiency, reviewing vaccination records, outlining feeding schedules based on his husky breed needs for high-protein diets to maintain their endurance, and securing a commitment to follow-up visits. Beneath all that reserve lies a resilient spirit, she encouraged as we prepared to depart, draping a clean blanket over the truck's seat for his comfort. "Approach with steadiness. He'll reveal himself gradually." The name Blue crystallized en route home, evoked by the profound azure of his irises, evoking the boundless cerulean vaults Timmy had adored during our lazy afternoons in the yard, where he'd sprawl on a picnic blanket, inventing constellations from drifting clouds with his vivid imagination. Inside the vehicle, the interior warmed with the natural, loamy fragrance of the shelter's linens, and Blue positioned himself stiffly on the passenger side, his muscles coiled as he gazed at the unfolding scenery, clusters of evergreens whipping past in verdant blurs, open pastures flecked with the last stubborn wildflowers of the season nodding in the wind. He uttered no protests, made no bids for reassurance. He was a paragon of composed vigilance, navigating the uncertainty with the innate resilience of his Siberian heritage, known from breed histories for their storied endurance in Arctic expeditions. The opening chapter of our shared life at home unfolded as a series of delicate negotiations, marked by mutual observation and incremental boundaries. I designated a serene alcove in the living room as his domain, furnishing it with a supportive memory foam mattress contoured for larger breeds to ease joint strain common in huskies, a wide-mouthed ceramic water dish to prevent spills, and a curated selection of enrichments from the specialty pet shop, interactive treat-dispensing balls, knotted rope toys infused with natural rubber scents, and even a snuffle mat mimicking foraging in snow for mental stimulation. Yet Blue eschewed them entirely, preferring to dissolve into the room's peripheries, insinuating himself beneath the sturdy oak kitchen table with its etched grain from years of family meals, or tucking into the alcove behind the faded floral couch where sunlight filtered sparingly through lace curtains. As I navigated my solitary routines, percolating dark roast coffee whose bitter aroma filled the mornings, or methodically washing dishes under the stream of warm water in the evenings, I'd address him in a murmur of casual intimacy, treating him as a confidant in an ongoing dialogue. "The forecast calls for more showers. It'll keep the dust down at least." He'd elevate his muzzle momentarily, a subtle perking of his pointed ears betraying faint intrigue, before withdrawing anew, his gaze a blend of vigilance and veiled curiosity that spoke volumes without a sound. Mealtimes mirrored this pattern of circumspect engagement. I'd measure out nutritionally balanced kibble, fortified with omega oils for coat health, as advised by Holistic Pet Care Resources, occasionally mixing in steamed carrots for added fiber, and position the bowl at a deferential distance. He'd bide until I absented myself, perhaps retreating to the study to leaf through an unread novel, before descending upon it with efficient, purposeful bites, devoid of the leisurely savoring one might expect from a secure animal. Each instance tugged at my resolve, yet I adhered to deliberate, non-intrusive patterns, echoing the gradual desensitization techniques outlined in animal behavior guides that stress predictability in rebuilding confidence. Nights amplified the solitude, stretching into vast expanses where the house exhaled with subtle groans under nocturnal breezes. Retiring to the bedroom, I'd confront the asymmetrical sag of the mattress on Sarah's vacant flank, while Timmy's upstairs domain persisted as an unaltered reliquary, his collection of plastic dinosaurs arranged in epic battles on the shelf, minuscule sneakers aligned precisely by the closet, gathering a fine layer of dust like forgotten sentinels. I'd attune my ears to any nuances from Blue below, a tentative scratch of nails on the rug or a contented huff, but often it was merely the architecture's natural size. One twilight hour, as the sun's descent infused the interiors with elongated amber hues via the partially shaded windows, I claimed the rear porch with a mug of herbal tea, chamomile blended with hints of honey, its vapors intertwining with the earthy perfume of sodden foliage and the faint, acrid trace of wood fires kindling in distant homes. Blue materialized at the screen door's frame, his outline etched in the fading light, hesitating through several long minutes before crossing the threshold with measured deliberation. He maintained a courteous buffer, alighting several paces distant, his keen nose sampling the twilight bouquet, moist loam from recent downpours, the subtle sweetness of late-blooming honeysuckle climbing the trellis Sarah had tended with such care. We remained in that tableau until constellations began to pierce the velvet sky, joined by the inaugural trill of crickets weaving their nocturnal melody. It lacked fanfare, yet within that companionable hush, I sensed the nascent weaving of affinity, fragile as spider silk but undeniable. Approximately a week into this emergent harmony, a nuanced evolution emerged, sparked by the most unassuming of discoveries. That afternoon found me in the attached garage, the space redolent with the nostalgic bouquet of archived lives, faint mildew from stored holiday decorations mingling with the clean linen scent of folded linens. I was systematically unpacking sealed cartons brimming with artifacts of our former existence. Timmy's assortment of graphic tees adorned with cartoon adventures, meticulously stacked yet untouched. Sarah's array of novels, spines creased from repeated borrowings at the local library, passages underlined in her looping script. The endeavor was framed as a therapeutic purge, an attempt to reclaim habitable square footage, but it unearthed more emotional strata than spatial relief, stirring recollections of lazy Sundays spent reading aloud as a family. A dull thud emanated from the adjacent house then, drawing me inward. Blue had initiated an independent foray into the living area, his posture low as he systematically scented the perimeter, charting the environs with the meticulous care of one affirming sanctuary at last. His exploration halted adjacent to the antique oak bookcase, its tiers bowed under accumulations of literary tomes and periodicals long consigned to obscurity. He prodded at a disheveled heap of glossy magazines that had cascaded to the carpeted floor, and from their midst tumbled Timmy's treasured red rubber sphere, worn smooth from innumerable pursuits, its exterior imprinted with the imprints of youthful grips and exuberant rolls across the sun-warmed grass, where he'd pursue it with unbridled zeal, his peals of delight cascading like summer rain. I'd preserved it amid the fog of morning, incapable of discarding such a visceral emblem of his spirit, though it had receded into the background clutter like so many other relics. Blue manipulated it delicately with a forepaw, propelling it a modest span, not in exuberant sport but with an intentional curiosity that hinted at innate familiarity. Subsequently, he pivoted to meet my eyes with those vivid azure orbs, angling his head in a query that transcended language, seeking perhaps validation or shared reminiscence, a sharp intake of air caught in my lungs, unleashing a torrent of vignettes. The echo of Timmy's voice calling, "Again, Dad," as the ball arced through the air, the way Sarah would applaud from her garden chair, her smile radiant as sunlight. "You've uncovered a piece of history there," I remarked, descending to a kneel on the threadbare area rug, modulating my motions to avoid intrusion. He yielded a solitary pace but anchored himself, observation unwavering, pulse quickening, I grasped the sphere and imparted a light rebound against the polished planks, the resonant thump reverberating with familiarity. It deviated toward him, halting proximate to his extended limbs. For the inaugural instant since his arrival, his tail ascended and executed a solitary exploratory sweep, a modest emblem of openness. We abstained from escalating to structured retrieval, eschewing theatrical flourishes. No soaring bounds or amplified elations materialized. Rather, he contemplated the object at his threshold, and within the easing of his features, I discerned the incipient thaw, akin to dawn's gradual illumination over a frost-laced meadow. Repose proved elusive that evening. My thoughts ensnared in spirals of speculation as I shifted restlessly beneath the lamp's muted radiance. At length, I descended to the tranquil kitchen, activating the laptop to its subdued whir, and immersed myself in digital explorations of husky lineages, narratives of misplaced companions, and chronicles from rescue operations. The alignment gnawed insistently. The toy's reemergence, his demeanor's resonance, the chronology's proximity. The incident had transpired on a treacherous artery of roadway roughly 20 miles distant, a meandering vein bordered by thickets of conifers and a precipitous descent to a frothing waterway, where precipitation rendered sightlines treacherous and curves unforgiving. Vivid images lingered from investigative diagrams and media footage. Mangled wreckage strewn akin to discarded playthings, strobing beacons cutting through the deluge, emergency personnel in sodden ponchos laboring into the wee hours. I'd surfaced from the ordeal with a lattice of mended bones and keloid traces, yet Sarah and Timmy had slipped beyond reach. What if Blue had intersected that maelstrom? The hypothesis bordered on whimsy, yet it rooted firmly, compelling further inquiry. Dawn brought a hasty repast of rye toast slathered with marmalade and a mug of unsweetened coffee that failed to quell the tremor in my grasp, prompting a call to Maria at the facility. "Detail the precise locale of his discovery," I inquired, striving for composure. She deliberated briefly before delineating with the exactitude of routine documentation. Post a cataclysmic tempest last spring, the deluge that inundated lowlands and felled ancient oaks, he materialized ensnared in underbrush along the highway at mile marker 47, bereft of identification, skeletal frame stark beneath his pelt. Hypothesis leaned toward discard by a negligent guardian or flight from adversity amid the tumult. Mile marker 47. The designation resonated like a tolling bell. That was the epicenter of devastation, where existence had fractured irrevocably. My extremities quivered as I replaced the receiver, a chill perspiration beating on my brow. Urged by the coalescing fragments, I secured Blue in the conveyance that midday, his inaugural excursion absent prior rigidity, albeit with lingering glances toward egress points. The itinerary traced accustomed routes, the pavement undulating past sunlit meadows aglow with seasonal golds, the waterway shimmering like molten silver beneath intermittent clouds. We halted at the designated overlook, a utilitarian wayside denoted solely by a time-worn crucifix and a bouquet of desiccated blooms deposited by anonymous mourners over months. Blue dismounted with augmented alacrity, his olfactory senses immediately engaged with the ambient bouquet borne aloft. Resinous conifer essence, saturated terrain, vestiges of exhaust from transient motorists. He circumambulated the vicinity with unhurried grace, then positioned himself beside the safety barrier, his azure gaze extending toward the verdant fringe as though sifting ethereal recollections, zephyrs tousling his plumage in tender undulations. Returning to the residence, with vespertine rays slanting through panes in golden lances, I pursued the enigma with renewed vigor. Queries proliferated across regional online hubs, delineating Blue's physique and temporal context, complemented by outreach to the attending clinician who'd managed his preliminary care, a pragmatic practitioner named Dr. Ellis, lauded for meticulous archiving in community testimonials. She verified the microchip assay conducted at admission, detecting a subdued emission from an antiquated embedment. It referenced a distributor in an adjacent district, originating from a whelp cohort dispersed circa 5 years prior, she elucidated via the intermittent static of connection. Absent, contemporary custodian, no amendments post-inception. Potential for successive transfers, culminating in unfortunate circumstances. The gale that had howled during the calamity was etched in collective memory, a torrent transforming rivulets to raging currents and dislodging arboreal giants along the thoroughfare. Delving into archival periodicals into the nocturnal hush, sustained by tepid infusions and the chronometer's inexorable advance, I unearthed a succinct notation in a periodical. Observations of an solitary husky haunting the vicinity of the collision in ensuing fortnights, evading conduits of transit and retrieval squads, subsisting on detritus amidst remnants. Resembled a vigil, the dispatch cited a thoroughfare sentinel who'd proffered victuals in vain. Lurked peripherally, observing, as though anticipating an absentee figure. The epiphany enveloped me not in tumultuous surge, but in a languid inundation, akin to mist ascending from the estuary. Blue transcended mere adjacency to the event. He was interlaced with its very warp. Conceivably, he'd borne witness to the cataclysm's unfoldment, the wrenching confluence of destiny beneath coruscating illuminations and cascading torrents. Alternatively, his progenitors might have orbited the periphery, their existences convulsed by the tempest's fury, consigning him to solitary peregrination. From ethnographies and anecdotal lore among breeders, huskies manifest unyielding allegiance, pack-bound with legendary tenacity, traversing vast tundras through tempests to reclaim kin, weathering adversities for cherished bonds. Timmy had fixated on their depictions in illustrated volumes, poring over vignettes of endurance with rapt fascination. "They stick through thick and thin, Dad," he'd proclaimed one fireside twilight, nestled with a beaker of warmed milk. Presently, this exemplar had intersected my trajectory, exhuming Timmy's orb as an emissary spanning our fractured realms, amalgamating bereavements in a manner eloquence could scarcely encapsulate. Commencing that transformative midday, our alliance burgeoned incrementally, a tapestry of restoration unfurling through diurnal cadences. Dawns metamorphosed into ambling excursions along the sylvan path, meandering posterior to the domicile, where vapor adhered to bracken and atmosphere bore the tangy zest of decomposed foliage beneath treads. Blue's extremities rustled in tandem with mine, his locomotion harmonizing, and, incrementally, the encumbrance upon my thorax alleviated with each synchronized respiration. He persisted in recoiling from abrupt acoustics, a klaxon echoing remotely or a limb fracturing beneath vermin, yet recurrently he'd abut his side to my calf amid those jaunts, a mute endorsement of reliance. The adjacency collective discerned our progression. Mr. Jenkins, the pensioned artisan adjacent with palms perpetually stained by lubricants and a timbre honed by decades of workshop discourse, would recline against his perimeter one crepuscular interval as we traversed, inclining his brimmed headpiece. Your companion's invigorated, evident vitality in his carriage, commendable effort on both parts. His consort, Evelyn, a confectioner with vestments dusted in powdery residue and prowess in pastry fabrication, approached subsequent instances bearing a container of artisan confections for canines, amalgamated with unprocessed nut essence and apple infusions for gustatory allure. Blue assimilated them with avid inhalation, then conferred his premier effusive caress upon an external entity, eliciting her mirth and a fond disheveling of his oracles. The juvenile inhabitants of the locale, encompassing Timmy's erstwhile comrades and emergent countenances, commenced congregating sporadically, their inquisitiveness inflamed by recitals of the melancholic canine reborn. Petite Emma, adorned with undulating twin braids and a dentition exhibiting beam akin to luminescent insects, rapped upon my portal one radiant Sabbath, clasping a cherished plush ursine. Esteemed Mr. Ellis, might Blue partake in our diversions? We vow circumspection. I pondered momentarily ere acquiescing, overseeing from the veranda risers as they assembled in the sward, verdure still moist from nocturnal precipitation. Initially, Blue surveilled from his proximal roost, demeanor sentinel yet composed, while the youths conversed and hurled diminutive stones desultorily. Upon Emma extracting a verdant, fibrillated orb from her satchel, a proxy for pursuit, I signaled assent. The projectile described a somnolent parabola, alighting with subdued rebound. Blue ascended leisurely, advanced, and secured it betwixt dentition sans vehemence, repatriating it to her locus with a considerate prod. The assemblage burst into jubilant exclamations. The enclosure vivified with kineticism and glee for the premier occasion in epochs, reverberations of the improvisational pursuits Timmy had masterminded with inexhaustible ingenuity. As solar ascent peaked, Emma approached posteriorly, her minuscule appendage interlacing with mine. He yearns for his lad, mirroring your longing for Timmy, aye? Yet contentment prevails. I compressed her grasp, articulation evading, though the veracity permeated my interior with temperate glow. Naturally, our trajectory incorporated impediments. Reclamation seldom proceeds linearly. Blue contended with nocturnal perturbations, coiling in his repose and emanating subdued, lamenting utterances, extremities spasming as though eluding specters, potentially reenacting the gale's bellow or disorientation of forsaking. I'd navigate the hushed domicile in somnolent vigils, planking chill beneath extremities, and position adjacent with the susurrus of solaces, caressing his lustrous oracles until exhalations stabilized and he inclined into solace, his thermal diffusion akin to restorative unguent. We sought counsel from Dr. Patel, the proximate clinician, a reticent gentleman hailing from Mumbai, whose praxis exhaled sterility laced with botanical essences from an aromatic vaporizer upon his escritoire, extremities assured and compassionate amid inspections. Anatomically, he exemplifies sturdiness befitting his lineage. He observed post-exhaustive scrutiny, auscultating Blue's cardiac rhythm via the acoustic apparatus. Notwithstanding, the effective lacerations necessitate regimen, affirmative bolstering. Your provision of foundational constancy augurs well, persevere, and observe his efflorescence. To augment that bedrock, we inscribed in comportment seminars at the contiguous communal edifice, a unassuming structure with an encircled exterior arena where ambiance thrummed with proprietor colloquy and patter of extremities upon shingle. The pedagogue, Lisa, a sinewy matron in her quadragenarian phase with bound tresses and provenance in salvaging endeavors, imparted directives with resolute yet motivational inflections. Blue demurred initially, contracting posterior to my shins amidst the throng of tethered canines, a vivacious beagle amid, an elongated sighthound yonder, oracles affixed rearward in disquiet. Yet Lisa's methodology embraced forbearance, inaugurating with elemental postures amid delicacies of desiccated hepatic tissue, progressively incorporating collective stances and unregulated tether ambles. One bracing morn as condensation gleamed upon instructional impedimenta, Blue sustained his posture directive sans deviation, meriting an auditory affirmation from her indicator and an appreciative stroke from me. "Observe that milestone," Lisa remarked subsequently, expunging perspiration from her forehead as we consolidated. "He emulates your duality, imprinted by antecedents, receptive to contemporaneity, a poignant symmetry. Her insight endured, a subtle impetus affirming my convalescence entwined with his, each modest triumph a conjoint advancement. As temporal cycles pivoted into climatic vicissitudes, our coexistence accrued profounder dimensions. Hemal onset manifested with a serene mantle of crystalline precipitation, transmuting the posterior sward into an immaculate expanse wherein Blue's pelage merged fluidly with accumulations, his azure orbs emergent like gems amid alabaster. We'd embark in primordial luminescence, encasements and extremities indenting the fluff, and I'd propel the crimson sphere into superficial mounds, chuckling subdued as he immersed in pursuit, resurfacing with proboscis encrusted in rime, and a victorious undulation dispersing particulates. Such ventures evoked narratives Sarah recounted from her juvenescence in northern realms, of erecting glacial bastions and descending inclines until insensate. Primal delights now imparted with Blue, inhaling the acerbic, pristine zephyr, freighted with vestiges of hearth emissions from proximate abodes. Vernal succession heralded with hesitant viridescence, urging rhizomes I'd interred in Timmy's commemoration to breach the substratum, tulips in muted rosaceous and aureate shades inclining in gusts. Blue shadowed my horticultural labors, excavating with zealous interments unearthing sinuous annelids, his lutic rictus unveiling as he proffered them akin to valuables, argillaceous residue besmirching his pallid extremities. One nebulous post-meridian, as aqueous percussion resounded upon the canopy, and Levin growled afar akin to a receding locomotive, Blue ventured audaciously. He traversed the salon and, with provisional scrutiny, ascended the divan proximal to me, gyrating once or depositing his cranium ponderously athwart my thighs. It constituted his debut unbidden incursion of proximity, unsolicited and resonant, the substantial mass anchoring me as I idly threaded digits through his integument, his bouquet, musky and subtly feral, commingling with the petrichorus infusion permeating fissures. Amid that tempest's auditory envelope, it evoked Sarah's tacit essence repatriating, her appendage once more entwined with mine, resolute and unwavering through the squall. Our chronicle commenced undulating externally, imprinting the salvaging collective in unanticipated manners. Maria materialized sans preamble one luminous fin de semaine, conveying a vessel of stratified alimentary amalgam, pasta strata with dairy, her modality of surveillance, and her visual orbs brimmed as she beheld Blue caper in salutation, caudal appendage fanning the ether. Heavens! Behold this metamorphosis, she aspirated, descending to embrace his nuzzle. Your intervention transcended rescue. It rekindled his luminescence, reciprocally for you, manifest in every countenance. Motivated thereby, we pledged recurrent benefaction intervals at the refuge, manifesting mid-forenoons to promenade neophytes along boundary conduits, Blue proceeding with tacit eminence. He'd accost the most diffident entrance, a quivering diminutive hybrid or an expansive oculared vagrant, with a tender olfactory contact, abiding until composure ensued, as though disseminating his arduously acquired precepts in fortitude. Amid one sojourn, a nascent duo with a boisterous infant in accompaniment roamed the enclosures, the progeny chortling as she waddled toward Blue's proffered extremity. He tolerated her plump digitated yanks with hallowed forbearance, erect while she prattled. Innate therapeutic essence, the sire commented, crouching to abrade Blue's mandible. Destitute of ceremonial indoctrination, yet discernible as a mender's anima. I inclined affirmatively, esteem burgeoning, not from accolades, but the innate manner Blue had assumed that mantle, transmuting affliction into subdued sustenance. Estival expansion ensued with indolent calidity, luminescent arthropods interlacing aureate filaments through gloaming as eventides elongated somnolent and protracted. I inaugurated diaristic inscription thereafter, populating a corium-encased codex with annotations less epistolary to the departed and more avowals to the extant. Folios inscribed beneath escritoire luminescence, blue extended at my pedals, his respirations a steadfast antiphony to the stylographic rasp. One inscription encapsulated totality. He exhumed not solely the orb, but fragments I'd interred, the elation in pursuit, serenity in intermission. Sarah, Timmy, should echoes attain you, recognize him as conduit, bearing your radiance in orbs. Appreciation transcends adequacy. I vocalized it to him one sultry vesper, casements agape to orthopteran symphony, and blue elevated his cranium, inclining with that endearing obliquity as though deciphering each phoneme. A spontaneous cachinnation emerged from me, unfeigned and liberating, inciting him to vault with a vocalization that pursued the sphere in ecstatic orbits, we entwining in kineticism akin to seasoned allies. Chronometry blurred margins additionally, anims fusing into a mosaic of fellowship. Blue's buccal region gleamed argent with senescence, his perambulation moderating to a reposeful saunter upon excursions. Nonetheless, his essence blazed unextinguished, and perennial torch. The vicinage interlaced us denser, estival convocations wherein he'd navigate amid extremities, supplicating with poignant orbs for fragments of carbonized fowl. Hymal observances adorned with illuminations mirroring in his integument like celestial bodies. The calamity's reminiscence endured, a subdued subcurrent, yet epoch and blue had mitigated its acuteness, converting visceral anguish into a chronicle of perseverance, communal and transcended. Dr. Patel substantiated during a periodical consultation, his acoustic device temperate from integumental proximity as he reassessed. Equilibrium attained, he proclaimed with inclination, repacking implements, for him and palpably for you, discernible in your worldly navigation henceforth. Upon a brisk autumnal diem evocative of the Genesis, we appropriated our veranda locus anew, my infusion vaporizing in the frigidity, Blue's cranium reposing placidly contra my femur, orbs languidly sealing in the oblique solar incidence. The enclosure whispered with foliate transmutations, a lenient zephyr portending precipitation. Within that tranquil interstice, the domicile no longer resounded with privation. It resonated with manifestation, replete and inhabited. Blue had recomposed my narrative not via ostentation, but via indefatigable fidelity, extracting me from seclusion with the nuanced potency of his scrutiny, his impetus, his elemental election to persist, and scrutinizing those eternal azure abysses I perceived my semblance, perdurance, incised yet integral, moored by tribulation and elevated by an indissoluble ligature. As inaugural droplets descended luminous and cadenced akin to a susurrated benediction, I comprehended we'd confront the vista conjointly aqueous or luminous, one imprint sequentially.